and welcome to everyone who is joining us for this panel. Welcome to all of you who have been in the previous one and are still joining us now. Now, when I say big innovations in health, what comes to mind? Feel free to call out. I'm going to start. Artificial intelligence. Anything else from our panel? What comes to mind when we talk about big innovations in health? 3D printing. Anything else? Artificial intelligence, absolutely. The truth is that we could spend the whole ChangeNOW conference talking about big innovations in health, but what we've done for you today is take a snapshot of some of the most innovative work that's happening right now, work that's we know will contribute to the health revolution, both for the next generation and the generations to come. Now, to kick off this session, I'm happy to welcome our very first panel. Joining me here on this stage, we have Frédéric Vacher, Head of Innovation at 3D Experience Lab. That's Dassault Systèmes' Open Innovation Laboratory and Startup Accelerator. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone.
Also joining us, Matthieu de Beule, CEO and co-founder of FEOPS. FEOPS uses cutting-edge technology to transform cardiac images into digital twins. That's virtual copies of the heart. We'll hear more on that later, but thanks for being here, Matthieu.
Yep, nice being here. Thank you.
And finally, also pleased to have with us Ziad Rouag, President and CEO of BIOMODEX, which uses 3D printing technology to conduct advanced physician training and rehearsals, ultimately reducing patient risk. Many thanks for being here.
Thanks. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to start with Frédéric, though, because you lead a lab with innovation in its DNA. What trends are you seeing in the area of health, and how has it evolved in recent years?
Yeah, you know, at Dassault Systèmes, we virtualize the world. Historically, the products, very complex products, such as planes, cars, but also a very simple product, almost everything around you. And we started with a medical device in this sector. Most of the medical devices are completely designed, engineered in 3D with our solutions. And we see a lot of extensions from that. First, we go from the device by itself to the experience, so that you not only see and experience the product, but only the procedure within the context. And for instance, just last week, we did announce a world premiere, which is a Vortex, a simulation center in virtual reality within an hospital, Hartman Institute, so that the patient can live the radiotherapy treatment in VR before having the real treatment, so he can be distressed.
So when you say live the treatment, could you tell us what would happen to that patient then?
Putting an headset,
yep.
A VR headset, and he's visiting the room, he's experiencing and looking at the robot, which is kind of impressive, and then he's laying down on the bed, and he sees the treatment in action, so that he can be distressed. So from product to experience. Also, what we are doing is we are investing a lot in the molecule design at the molecular level for all the pharmaceutical industry, so that they can do what we do historically in the industries, such as plane, cars, and so on, but for a molecule. Inventing, designing, certifying, and now doing all the clinical trials on a cloud platform. And in the mix, you have the human. So we virtualize the human bodies. And at the lab, we started with organs, so that we can connect either the medical device or the implants with the patient-specific organ. So we started with a project called Living Art Project. It was 8 years ago, with the objective to represent in the digital world the art behavior. So not only the 3D model of the art, but all the behaviors and the physical properties of the organ, so that we can use this organ as a research project and then create some user scenarios. But from that, now what we can do is we can do patient-specific organs from the medical imaging, so that you have the virtual twin of the patient in the virtual world, so that you can do a lot of things. And my colleagues will speak about it as they are accelerated with our 3D Experience Lab program in those sectors.
Well, then I will turn to Matthieu, because we've just heard a little bit about what we can do in terms of the heart and making a virtual twin. Could you just tell us a bit back about your work? It started as a research project. How did you realize that this could be something much bigger?
Yes, correct. So thank you. Like Frédéric said, we started by the support of Dassault let's say, transforming medical images into a personalized computer model of that patient. And why we did it and why we did it for the heart is that today 1 in 3 persons die of cardiovascular disease. And this is leading cause of death worldwide, and this will remain like that for the coming years. So this is a very global charge on the healthcare system. What we see now is a lot of these therapies are minimally invasive, meaning if a physician treats a heart, they don't open the chest anymore, but they make small incisions in the thigh, and then they go with small wires in place to implant devices. Now, the biggest challenge there is that the physician doesn't see the heart anymore, so he has to rely on medical images to make very important decisions on what implant size, what implant position is optimal for a particular patient. And what we have done is we have used these medical images, we have transformed them in a computer model, and we can test these different scenarios up front in order to provide insights to the physician that helps him select the correct implant for the correct patient. And like that, we can make these procedures more efficient and also more safer for the patient.
So we're making digital versions of ourselves that then are going to help better patient outcomes because the physicians have better information.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
If I've summarized right. Now, Frédéric, you oversee the 3D Experience Lab program, which I believe Ziad was also a part of. Explain how you accelerate some of this disruptive innovation.
It's a project that we started, an initiative started 6 years ago, with the objective of taking startups very early stage, startups that disrupt and that really impacts the society. So we are on all fronts, not only life science, but also energy, mobility, and we have a lot of projects, but we are very selective. And what we do is we provide them access to our solutions, to our platforms, but not only. We connect them with some mentors, some experts that will help them to industrialize their project. And we can also help them to scale, to go abroad, to connect with industrials. As you know, we are in 140 countries. We cover 11 industries. So more or less, we know most of the industrials worldwide. And for a startup, it's very key to have the right contact at the right time. So for instance, with BIOMODEX, we help them to go in Boston, to settle them and to connect with the local ecosystems. So it's not only a technology accelerator, but it's really an accelerator for success to the company. And when we met first time, Ziad, with the first team, the guys were 2. So it's not, you know, the picture 2 in the garage, but almost. And now, how many people are you, Ziad?
23.
Yeah, 23. So in 4 years, it's a very interesting ramp up.
Can you tell us a bit about how you started out? Where were you working? Not in the garage, but when you met Frédéric and his team, and also how being part of this program has helped, but also what work you do.
Great. Well, thank you. So Biomedics was started as an idea, a basic concept of, okay, there's digital twins. Now let's see if we can make physical twins, because in the world of transcatheter procedures, what Matthieu was talking about earlier, these physicians today, there's less and less surgery and more catheter-based procedures, which requires you to make small incisions, come in with a catheter, use all kinds of navigation and imaging modalities to be able to treat a patient. So we had the digital component, it exists. There are some elements there. You can take measurements and so on. FEOPS, for example, takes it to the next level. We decided as a company to say, okay, you've got the digital twin. Now let's try to do something that's actually haptic, meaning something that you can print, that you can feel as you're advancing a catheter system through it, a guide wire, a dilator, or whatever system, or an implant. The interventionalist has to feel with his hands at the level of the groin, effectively, something that's happening within the heart, right? So you have about a meter and a half of wire, and you have to feel it with the tip of your fingers. Well, how do you do that on a digital model? Well, you can't. So we would print the digital model, and then you effectively give that to the physician, put it into a system, pressurize it, and then have the physician use that digital model to rehearse a procedure or to train on a procedure.
And we see live what Ziad is saying, is what you can see with the colors is the artery of the patient. In white, it's the cartridge, which is 3D printed, and that is inserted into this gray basal station in which you put a liquid having the same property than the blood, and it creates a test bed so that the surgeon can train, and he will train on your own aneurysm. Each patient is having his own cartridge.
So patient-specific.
It is. So every cartridge is in itself patient-specific. But we do, some of these cartridges are used for training by companies when they launch a new product, or when they want to do clinical trials, or they use it for R&D validation, and sometimes now to replace animal studies. So there's many, many applications for the technology. There's also case-specific when you have very complex patient cases with high risk of mortality or morbidity. We have more and more companies and physicians coming to us and saying, look, this is a dangerous case. I want to rehearse that specific case before I touch the patient. And so you have two real modalities: training, which is new technologies you're learning all the time, and then you've got the super complex cases that people will want to rehearse on.
And do you have any data on, how rehearsing helps? Like, do we know that it actually makes a difference?
That's a very good question. So we do. We have a number of peer-reviewed publications that have come out over the last 2-3 years. We have a data set from a major French hospital in Rennes showing the impact in neurovascular procedures, so with patients that have an aneurysm. Pre-treating those patients or rehearsing those patients, like you see on this particular cartridge here, before doing the real case has a real impact. And when you have aneurysms, time is important. And it's even more important when you have stroke cases. So the more prepared you are in navigating where to put a stent and so on and so forth, the more likely you're going to have better outcomes in the actual procedure. So the data is now beginning to compile. There's obviously more need for research and more larger studies, but intuitively, I think everybody understands the more preparations you have, the better you're likely to have better outcomes.
Now, I understand both of you were part of the 3D lab experience, if that's right. Can you tell me, both of you, perhaps how that did? Matthew, you were as well part of the. Yes.
Sure.
How it helped you? What was the biggest help for you? Just so I understand kind of how these kind of systems and labs help startups. When they're two people, you were, and how big were you when you?
Well, we were a bit bigger at that moment. I think we were about 15 at that.
Okay. All right. Perhaps starting with you, Matthieu.
Yeah, with pleasure. So I think one of the biggest advantages we have of working together with Frédéric and his team is that on the one side, they have the best technology out there. I mean, with the simulations that we are doing, these are that complex to mimic real living tissue behavior. I don't think there's any other software out there that is able to tackle these problems. So having access to the technology, having their experts helping us and guiding us, and as Frédéric also said, introducing us into their network has helped significantly at our end.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the software component is huge. Basically, we use similar softwares, both of us, within the 3DS family. Katia is a major piece of software. There's also SolidWorks. And of course, we use a different software for FEA work and material analysis. That's also a Dassault system software, an extremely sophisticated software. So first of all, without that, you can't do what we do. It's impossible. And then, of course, there's the whole logistical environment from Dassault and 3DS that helps smaller companies, like Frédéric was speaking earlier, helping us set up, for example, in Boston, giving us contacts initially, sort of kind of putting us up on our feet, and then we could run with it.
How do you go about identifying the candidates for your lab project?
We use a lot of data. We develop a data intelligence dashboard so that we can radar all the newcomers. We radar all the 17 SDGs so that to cover, a broad scope. We obviously go into events like this one, like ChangeNOW. But we also have partners, incubator partners all around the world. We partner with the best in class, with the MIT, with Berkeley, with Centec in Canada, in Paris, with Polytechnique or HEC. We have partners everywhere. We rely on our internal network because at Dassault Systèmes we are almost 23,000 people in many countries. So in case they have a dinner and they meet an interesting startup, they automatically share in our community. So we have a communities platform so that we can interact all around the world and share, our informations.
In terms of patient outcomes or changes in patient outcomes, what are we talking about? Are these incremental changes? It's going to be a little bit better, or are we talking about radical transformations in the healthcare system? Perhaps starting with you, Frédéric.
It brings radical changes. For instance, I was talking about the living heart model. It was the first digital model certified by the FDA. Because all what we do in the virtual world needs to be certified, right? And it's brand new. And everything we do in terms of simulation needs to be certified. For the patient, it's improving the patient journey. I'm not saying that every one of us will have his virtual clone, you know. I don't believe it's a right idea. But in terms of organ specifics, when you need a particular surgery, most probably we'll all have our virtual organ so that it will be used for simulation, for training, for planification of the surgery, up to implant. And we accelerate projects in India, for instance, for facial surgery, which is usually very complex. The startup called Lucy Implant, they scan the bones of the patient. They design in 3D the patient-specific implant. And then they do the surgery with the implant that has been 3D printed. So it's huge because it's the exact implant morphology that match the patient morphology.
And how you talked about we would all be having digital representations of our organs. When is that for? That's I've got a surgery in a couple of weeks. Is it?
We'll need to scan yourself.
No, I don't imagine I did. But realistically, when are we? How far are these time frames for this, Matthieu, for example?
Today, they are in production with those technologies.
Yeah. So to the question whether this is disruptive. I definitely think it is, and I definitely want to make that statement because if we look at what have been done today, if you look at these medical images that are used for planning, what they have been doing for the last 10, 15, 20 years is you take these images, you measure on these images what the size of that patient is, and based on that you need to decide what implant size will I select for that patient. Now this is pretty challenging because if you put a device in a patient, this device deforms, the anatomy deforms, and if you make the wrong choice, you can have life-threatening complications. So if you look at actual usage, because as you said, when is this available? Today. So if you have a surgery tomorrow, we can help you today, where we can take your CT scan, we can make a computer model of your heart, and we can then challenge or model different treatment scenarios. And what we have observed is that, for example, in some of these procedures, they use on average 1.4 devices per patient, meaning that they make measurements, they try a device, if it doesn't work, they take it out again, they put a new one in, which is of course not efficient. With our technology, we can bring it down to one. Same thing with contrast being used, the time of the procedure, this is all going down. So this is happening today as we speak, and we will only further improve it as we go.
Is that the same with you, Ziad?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the end of the day, and I'll give you an example. I mean, CTs done on patient is not that old. And today, that is the complete standard of care. We're taking this CT technology, which is the basis of what we use, we digitize it, we segment it, we use these digital images, and then we are able to do two things. I mean, FEOPS, that's its own thing with the digital part, we do the physical part. So there is a bit of a symbiotic relation between the two. But I personally think in the future, if you're going to have a complex medical procedure, right, having an aneurysm dealt with or a valve put in, this technology is going to be so available and so common that almost every patient will have its procedures pre-planned and prepared in either digital format or physical format or a combination of the two, which will completely reduce these risks, or at least reduce them as far as possible. So we think really this could become the standard of care.
And all this is available on the cloud platform, so that you can expect to have, remote advices on planning. For instance, your specialist is in Paris or in London, and he will help, some local surgeons that are in Africa or wherever, and they can connect on the virtual model of the patient on the cloud in a secured environment.
Wow, so it's kind of mixing different technologies, different, combining.
Exactly. On this could be accessible from your smartphone, so you can imagine, how far it can go.
Right now, we're talking a lot about innovation that's looking at fixing problems. I've got a problem, I need a surgery. Could we eventually go further and use some of this technology as a bit of an alert system to, identify potential problems? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if anyone...
No, of course you can, and that's again the beauty of having this cloud-based technology is the power is in the data that you're gathering, because the more data sets you gather, the more insights you get on these diseases, the more insights you get on how these diseases are progressing. And I envision within, let's say, 2, 3, 4 years from now, that based on the CT scan at day 1, we will be able to predict what the right time is to treat a particular patient with which technology. and basically also by whom. So this is definitely coming. I mean, sure.
Yeah, I totally agree, because we're developing so much data right now, and to feed algorithms, you need data. So now we're getting these libraries of cases, how they're prepared, how they're planned, what the results look like. And you have enough data, you can move into a predictive algorithm world. So that's coming. That's a few years away. So imagine you're a patient that has a regular anatomy. If you have a CT, for example, or a scan of a particular valve or something, we think, at least I believe, that with the data that's being developed today, we'll be able to make some predictions whether you're going to develop some kind of a heart disease problem or a valve disease problem, and so the prediction capacity is going to just increase.
True, and I think the COVID pandemic was a very strong accelerator. I guess now everyone is familiar with Moderna or BioNTech, those type of names that were unknown 5 years ago. And they all, developed and have done their clinical trials on the cloud, on our platforms. And it's one of the reasons why they succeeded to do it online, because, at that time, everyone, was supposed to be at home. So it was not possible to gather a cohort of patients and bring them to an hospital, physically. So everything was done on the cloud in a secured environment.
You talk about COVID-19 pandemic. It reminded us that our health system can be vulnerable, but it also is spurred incredible innovation in the same way the climate is spurring innovation in the environmental sector. Are these kinds of crises, in fact, healthy for innovation?
It was. I'll give you another example. At the beginning of the pandemic, we did not know how the virus was spreading, if it was air spreading or not. So we first started with my American colleagues on the MIT to create a model of the flow and to have a sneeze of a virtual patient with the COVID particles, the same size. The first, it was to optimize the protections, the face shields and so on, and to better understand at which distance we should recommend 2% to be in front of. But then, when the pandemic started to arrive in Europe, we first had a hospital in France. It was at the east of France. They were having COVID infected patient. They were, putting all the protections. All the doctors were heavily protected. They were separated with other patients. And even with that, everyone was infected and they could not understand. So we started to do airflow simulation. So taking some solvers that were used in the aeronautics, for airplanes, or in automobile to optimize the CX of the car, in order to understand the propagation of the virus within an hospital. And we run the solvers, and they really immediately show and saw and understood what was the issue. And to give you the
what was the issue? Tell us.
very simple issue and very easy to change. They were a big corridor, and in the corridor, they were the coffee machine on the water, So the doctors were leaving the patient room, leaving their protection to drink a coffee, and they were infected because of the airflow. So all what we do is not a game, and what you have seen is a virtual twin or a virtual experience that is scientifically conformed to the reality. So when we did this with the hospital, we were taking, obviously, all the floor plan to put everything in 3D, but all the pressure, temperature, doors, windows, air conditioner, ventilation systems, to put all this in a model and to run the computation to understand how it goes in the virtual world.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. I mean, the fundamental thing is necessity is the mother of invention. So, COVID was a major crisis, but it allowed some things to be created, develop these new RNA vaccines, for example. I mean, that's not just for COVID. I mean, we're going to see a revolution in vaccines and for all kinds of different issues out there. And I think for us, during the COVID, we all had to adapt, whether it's Dassault, whether it's FEOPS or us. We went a lot more digitals. At the beginning of COVID, the hospitals were shut down for anything elective procedure. Everybody is dealing with COVID. So we had to adapt. We had to go online. And many of the companies were effectively using our products to teach physicians remotely. So they'd send them the product. They would have Zoom calls. Physicians would actually use the product remotely. They'd have camera systems. So humanity is extremely adaptive, even though we can hit some, crises and bumps here and there. So this particular one has allowed a lot of people to adapt.
And I guess we could say that the crisis, the health crisis at the moment in terms of heart disease is a crisis. Is that, you know, in a longer form crisis, COVID was an acute crisis, if you will, that lasted 3 years. But, you know, the crisis of obesity is something that's driving innovation as well. That's, you know, what you're answering to with some of your projects.
That's true. In each crisis, you have innovations, and we found, you know, a lot, even if it was a difficult period of time for most of us. Yeah.
I'd like to thank our three panelists, Frédéric, Matthieu, and Ziad, for your comments and candid explanations of your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll leave it there. We're going to leave digital twins aside for a moment and wander into the equally fascinating space of biotechnology, which I might add is also using artificial intelligence to drive innovation. It's my pleasure to now welcome Eric Quéméneur, Chief Scientific Officer at the French-based biotech company Transgene. Transgene is a true pioneer in the sector and has among its various ambitions to engineer custom-designed cancer vaccines for individuals. So just let us sit on that for a moment. Eric's here to tell us everything we need to know. Welcome to you, Eric.
To share our, is it good? Okay. Good to see you. Good evening. Thank you for the invitation to share with you our innovation path in developing a specific drug for treating cancer, that are out to treat cancers. And congrats to the organizers for the big event, very inspirational and very different from the atmosphere we are feeling in our pharma industry meeting. So I'm a pharmacist and biochemist by training, and I've lived in the last decades the big transformation of our industry with the boom of genomics, the boom of bioengineering, the arrival of brand new ways to design and develop drugs, also the arrival of data science. And of course, we will discuss about that when we are thinking on how we could use this big amount of data to renovate the way we are designing and creating our drugs. There are few companies, in fact, who have been able to accelerate and take the risk we have taken in the last 4 years in this respect. The story I will tell you started 4 years ago. Of course, we were traveling with my friend Kate Benjamin, who is the leader of the program I will describe, in the UK, as we do, visiting clinical sites, and we were facing a big kind of personal challenge. We discussed who failed in all, and we discussed how could he benefit from this data we have. We got his tumor sequence. We got everything we needed to make vaccines, but as you know, our industry is heavily regulated, and it's not so easy to make a fully tailored product for him that we were sure could help him prevent recurrence for his cancer. He died, unfortunately, but that was really the sparkle to our innovation program. And since that time, really, we have made our best to be fast in this game. What is the product I'm speaking about? It's a neoantigen-based vaccine. We will make it from the sequence tumor. We can compare this sequence with the reference material from the normal cells and identify thousands of mutations that are specific to the tumor. Among them, we know that there are some somatic mutations that can be used as triggers for the immune system. And the challenge, of course, is to select those eligible mutations, arrange them in a way so that it can be put in a vector, I will say about our technology, and use that as a preventive vaccine to prevent recurrence. Of course, the patients will be treated with current standard of care treatment, might succeed, might fail, usually might temporarily succeed, so we know that there will be a lot of recurrence. And if you recur after standard treatment, it's quite unlikely that you might respond a second time to the treatment. So you need something to help you cure on long term. That's really the purpose of tailored vaccines. So this job of selecting, characterizing, ranking mutations that would be meaningful in the frame of a cancer design is really the core of our MyVac program. And we have implemented this neoantigen discovery program in our currently well-established viral vector technologies. Important point, we are using viral vector as therapeutic agent. The reason, and COVID really exemplified that, viruses are fantastic immune-active nanomachines that have been offered by nature. Of course, we should take care of selecting the proper viruses, those that would be safe, or that we can make safe by engineering, and that we have with the vaccinia virus, for example. And our program is based on that combination of expertise. All what we have learned over the last decades in developing regular viral vector-based drugs now can benefit from this AI discovery engines that we have built to select neoantigens that would be assembled into relevant polyepitopic synthetic peptides that we engineer in the viral genome. That would be the therapeutic agent. And because it is very specific, those sequences to each single patient, we are dealing here with the challenge of preparing a drug that should undergo the whole development package from candidate design, prototyping, GMP manufacturing, QC release, as fast as we can. And as you can imagine, there's a lot to invent and to innovate in this acceleration. But there is a race against cancer. So we have really to do our best to tackle with the very single steps that could help us go fast in this direction. And that's the way we have really also built a strong IP around this program. I mentioned AI. So Transgenes, per se, we are not really AI expert. And from the very beginning of this program, we have started this discussion and this thinking with NEC, which is a Japanese IT company. They have a very strong genome analysis program based on AI. And they were very part of our discussion from the very beginning. And they're now co-investor in the program, 50-50 with us. We run it globally. And we already have 10 patients treated. Good success. We are in the process of clinical trials and approval. But at the same time, we run the validation of the technology. We, of course, work at accelerating the manufacturing process. Our current target is to go around 10 to 12 weeks from the tumor sequence to the product delivered on site for the patient treatment. The setting we have now is for 2 diseases where patients usually get surgery, and they are monitored, and we know that within some months there might be a recurrence. Then a chemotherapy will be started. Our idea is to have this preventive vaccine ready at the time of early signs of recurrence, before a true cancer or true secondary tumor is detected. People would have got vaccines that should help their immune system fight against the reinitiation or reprogression of this cancer. Sorry, that's positioning. As you heard, we have a few weeks or months to make it. If we want to address other cancers that are very fast progressing, of course, we will have to improve our technologies. That's what we're currently doing. But we will do the same in parallel, improve the technology and develop the demonstration of the safety and efficacy of the product in selected diseases. So we are now living a very interesting period for me as a pharmaceutical developer, something I would never have dreamt to do 2 decades ago. Being able to use the best of science, the best of big data, the best of bioengineering to make a very ambitious program from scratch. Usually it takes 10 to 15 years from the idea to the drugs approved. We hope with this program to be on a fast track. And I still hope that we will be able to get good and strong demonstration of the activity of the product in the years to come. Because we are dealing with personalized vaccine, of course, there are major challenges in terms of approval, confirmation that the process is stable, but there are single product, single-use product in the sense that the product will be specific for each patient. So we are also thinking how the lessons we learn from these programs could also benefit future patients in determining what are the rules or common features for all those patients that we'll treat that could be reused in second-generation program. So that's the story. as you see, this example of change, because of course it's a very unusual development process in our industry, it also implied that we mobilized very different skills, transdisciplinary skills. We had to make molecular biologists, virologists discussing very precisely with computer scientists on how to select neoantigens that could be engineered in the virus and be easily made within the time frame that we had. So really this program has been demonstrating, I think, what can be achieved today if you're a volunteer willing to change in this industry. So thank you for your attention. Of course, next steps are obvious. Being faster than the cancer, being smart so to get approval, and of course to work, if we can, to make this technology more amenable to everybody. Today it's crazy expensive, of course. We are dealing with prototypes, with very specific and intensive patient analysis. But if we could be as fast as you were in the last year, in the years to come, maybe that would be also a product that to be available to anyone. So a big greetings also to my colleagues, a big greetings also to my CEOs, Philippe Archinard and René Beule, who enabled us to do that. We are a very structured industry. Very difficult, in fact, to take risk in our industry. We have a lot of pressure from investors, from analysts, and this program was started really as an experience that we thought would be more stuck in the research labs, in the wet labs, and I would not have bet 4 years ago that we could be in clinics today. We did it, and thanks to those guys. And also thanks to our major investor, Institut Matthieu, who really brought us also with this kind of creative spirit that has been instrumental in all the program. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eric. It's a real theme that's been coming through the Change Now discussions, the speed with which innovation and technologies are being kind of fast-tracked to fruition, if you will. You did touch on it just briefly, but this kind of research is notoriously expensive. How can you make it accessible to a global market? You touched on it briefly, but I'm going to come back to it.
Right, that is a very good point, and of course it's an everyday problem. So certainly the solution will be largely in technology. So of course the products are unique for each patient, but basically the process is shared for all the product. We are thinking about automation, we are thinking about shortening the delays that would be, of course, would have an impact on the cost. We are thinking also on reducing the lead time in terms of critical steps for release or QCs. All that contribute to the overall cost. And so if we could save, thanks to technologies, if we make progress there, that would be directly impactful. One point is also the way we will be able to discuss about reimbursement in the future, as those drugs should be approved first, and in a sense, there are very expensive processes to get the drug tested in clinical conditions with a lot of analytical duties, and of course, this is a must at the start, but as soon as the drug would be approved, depending on the type of service that the drug could render, the discussion we will have with the agencies, of course, we hope to be able to come to something more accessible.
Can we imagine, you're talking about cancer, obviously, here, but can we imagine it being used for in other areas?
Absolutely, yeah, that's the revolution we have had in the last 10 years. Immunotherapy is, when we were a student, I think immunotherapy was considered as good ideas from the past century, but practically immunosuppression would be everywhere. Cancer, we were taught that they are insensitive to immunotherapy, they are stealthy to the immune system, and now look, so many drugs, we know the brakes or the boosters for immune response. And that's true also in other diseases like neurological diseases are also prone to immune control. We know that some forms of rare genetic diseases might be eligible to gene therapy treatment using part of those technologies. So we see also possibility to expand outside of cancer field.
And just finally, what would you say has been the biggest challenge in developing the technology? Has it been the finance? Has it been the science? What?
all
of the above. There's no all of the above.
I would say, if I should rank them, I would say the human challenge was the best one. It was the most important one, because of course, as you might know in
A
our...
real scientist, the hardest was the best one.
I've heard so many times that it would not work. You're crazy. It's a crazy idea, not feasible. So I think the human transformation was first. Of course, money would be something important, not in the very early steps. So we are kind of now discussing that with wealthy people and how could they support the program. Of course, we'll need for the clinical development more investment. But at the stage of discovery, design, and early clinical trials, it's really feasible. Technology are in progress. So I think our program just benefits from that. We are not driver for that. We are just supported by the progress of technology around us.
Thank you very much, Eric, for your time and
Thank
your
you.
information. Thank you very much. I'm going to move to our final segment of our session. Now, what happens if we put together the most brilliant minds in the academic, tech, and humanitarian sectors? I'd argue a project that looks a lot like Antibiogo. Antibiogo is a free diagnostic aid application to counter antibiotic resistance. And I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Malou from Médecins Sans Frontières, who is the clinical lead, project manager, and in fact, the entire driver of the idea. Hello, and thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you very much.
I'd like us to start at the beginning. How did you discover that there was a need for this kind of app?
In fact, I think what makes also this app unique is that it came from the field and the population who are going to benefit from this app. So in 2016...
So it's a real bottom-up kind of model.
Yeah, exactly. And so in 2016-17, in Yemen, so the conflict was very strong in the south of the country. And we were receiving in our hospitals a lot of war-wounded patients coming with infected wounds and with very complicated wounds to treat. And so some of them had to be amputated because of those infections. And we realized very quickly that we need to have access to microbiology in order to identify what is causing those infections and what are the antibiotics that can be used to treat optimally those infections. The problem is that there was no microbiology lab at that time in the south of Yemen, and there was no possibility to have microbiologists go in there regarding the conflict. And that's how the idea came. It's like, why we don't create an app where we can, with any smartphone, take a picture of the test and have the full interpretation that a clinical microbiologist would be able to do if this patient was received, for example, in France or in Europe.
So really, why do certain areas not have access to something that's taken for granted in other areas of the world? Could you walk us through what happens with this app? Like, you know, step by step, what would happen? A patient walks into somewhere in the world? Talk us through.
Yeah. So maybe just to start, just to explain how it would work in Europe or in high-income countries. If you go to the hospital, you have an infection, you have fever, we will take a sample, any type of samples, we will send it to the lab, and in the laboratory, we will try to identify the bacteria that is causing the infection and what are the antibiotics that can be used. In low and middle-income countries, those laboratories does not exist. And so when the patient arrives with fever, we have to treat them very quickly. For example, for children, we call that the golden hours. You have very few hours where you need to treat with the most appropriate antibiotics. But because you don't have access to a laboratory, then you treat your patient almost blindly, we say empirically, and you don't know if those antibiotics are going to treat the patient or after a few hours if the patient, especially children, will die. And so with the app today, even if you don't have access to a clinical microbiologist and trained human resources, which is the case in most of low and middle income countries, the patient arrives to the hospital, we will take his sample, as in Europe and high income countries, we will identify the bacteria, and with the app, we will take the picture of the test, and the full interpretation of the results will be done, and we will be able to say, sorry, we will, sorry, and we will be able to say to the clinician, those drugs can be used to treat optimally this patient.
I'm going to get you some water.
Yeah, thank you.
Could be so. While you're pouring it. At what moment did you think, wow, this technology exists, we can actually do this? This isn't a, wouldn't it be great? This is actually something that we could deploy.
In fact, it did not really start like this because it was just a crazy idea. It's like the dream would be like to have this on a phone and to take pictures. But for me, as a microbiologist, there was no idea of technology behind that. And that's how we start working with the MSF Foundation. So the MSF Foundation is the innovative arm of Médecins Sans Frontières. So once we identify some medical gaps like this in the countries where we intervene, the MSF Foundation tried to find innovative solutions. And by different collaboration with the academic, with the tech world, but also the humanitarian. And so at the beginning, it was just an idea, and then we start discussing with all those organizations, institutions, university, trying to identify the solution that can be used, the technological solution that can be used to develop this app. And that's how we came up with like different parts. Like, for example, we use artificial intelligence for the detection of the antibiotics name, to read the antibiotics name. We also use image processing to capture the test. And then we use a set of, it's what we call an expert system. So all the rules that clinical clinical microbiologists learned during several years at the university, we tried to gather them in a kind of algorithm that can allow the laboratory technician in low and middle income countries to interpret the test as good as a clinical microbiologist if they were available.
That leads to my next question. How good is it, and can it replace, our microbiologists?
It's very difficult to say that...
or is it better then?
It's very difficult to say that we want to replace, because that's not at all the idea, to replace clinical microbiologists. There is a very interesting publication last year describing the lack of human resources and pathologists in low and middle income countries. For example, for clinical microbiologists, if we want to have the same ratio than in Europe or in US, we need to wait 400 years for sub-Saharan Africa. So we know that our objective is not to replace clinical microbiologists, but to fill the gap until we have enough clinical microbiologists. Because, yeah, we started talking about the app, but the main problem is antibiotic resistance. And today is one of the major public health threats. And we know that if there is no action taken today, we will have 10 million deaths per year by 2050, and mainly on the African and the Asian continent. So there is this 400 years, and whereas if we don't act today, we will have 10 million deaths, and that's how the app came. And finally, so we went for a clinical trial in 3 different countries. This is something that was also very, very important for us, is to test the app in the countries with the population and the patient who are going to benefit from its development. And so we tested the app in Jordan, in Amman, among a population of war-wounded patients that we are receiving in our MSF facilities in Amman. The second site was the south of Mali, in Kuchala. It's a pediatric hospital where we receive children with malaria, with HIV, with malnutrition, and they are also infected with the bacterial infections. And the third site is an external collaboration. It's not an MSF hospital. We collaborate with Pasteur Institute in Dakar, where it is more a city laboratories where we receive patients coming for simple urinary tract infection, for example. And so we analyze all this data. So it was also very interesting to identify how are we going to evaluate the app. What would be the gold standard that we will use as a reference method? Usually, when you look to all the equipment that performs tests like this, they are always tested against another machine. Mm-hmm. From our side, we decided to test it against the human, because that was what we were trying to
replace or
exactly,
fill the gap.
Exactly. So, we were taking pictures of those tests in those countries, in the hospitals, And those pictures were sent to two external clinical microbiologists in France. They were doing their own interpretation. The app was doing its own interpretation, and then at the end, we compared both interpretation. And so today, the results show that we have the concordance between the app interpretation and the clinical microbiologist range from 90 to 98%, depending on which bacteria. And most of the time, the app is doing better than the microbiologist because it really applies the rules always in a systematic way, always in a standard way. So you remove the variability that you can introduce by having different human with different training doing the interpretation.
So those are the dream results, really, for you, were they?
Yeah, it's I think we were not expecting such great results when we started this project. Now we are very happy because those results will allow us to certify the app and to have it acknowledged as a diagnostic test that can be used in a very safe way for our patients and the population that we are receiving in different facilities where MSF is intervening.
Now, the project itself represents an interesting collaboration between the academic, humanitarian, and tech sectors. Does that collaboration always run smoothly?
It's a good question. Not always, especially at the beginning. It's three different worlds.
Can you tell us who you were working with?
Yeah, we were working, for example, with two universities here in Paris, University of Évry, which is a mathematics department, and we were working also with the techs because we won the Google AI Challenge organized by Google.org, and we had the support of Google by having like 8 fellows working on the project for 1 year. And then you have the medical people, microbiologists, clinicians, and you have the humanitarian sector with the constraint also of the field. And we cannot, for example, for clinical trial, we were delayed because, of course, as Médecins Sans Frontières, our priority is our patients. So because of COVID, everything was postponed. And so it's sometimes very difficult to have a clear plan when your activities depend also of the context where you are working, sometimes the political situation. And so at the beginning, it was very complicated because we were sitting around the table and we realized that we were using the same word, but the word were having a different meaning for each one of us. And so it took us quite a lot of time, and I think it's not something that we succeed to resolve, and it's something that we continue to work on with the different collaboration that we are creating. I think the most important is really to all agree on the objective. And as the project and also as Médecins Sans Frontières and the foundation also Médecins Sans Frontières, our objective is our patients and is to provide the best quality of care for population who does not benefit of this quality of care or all those drugs or tests that are available in high-income countries. So if we all agree and we all work around one objective, which is this one, then we end up finding kind of translator.
A common building bridges.
Exactly, in order to build the bridge between the different sectors.
Okay, so always coming back to that why
yes.
are we here? What
yes.
are we doing? What happens from now? Where are you right now in this app development? How do you plan to roll it out? Explain, where we go.
It's very interesting because we are like a few days before submitting our file for the CE certification, so to have a CE mark. It's the first time for MSF and the MSF Foundation to develop such a tool and also to become a legal manufacturer. So it's a big step for us. It's going to be I think an important moment for all the team and for the foundation also. It's going to be next week. And so after that, we will start the implementation first within MSF project and MSF laboratories. So we need to take some time in order to understand which kind of feedback from the user we are going to have, which kind of bugs we are going to have, which kind of difficulties, requests. So we decided to go in a kind of stepwise approach. So we start with MSF laboratories. So for example, Mali, Jordan, Yemen, Central African Republic, and Liberia. And then after MSF implementation, we will open largely and broadly the app and give it accessible to all laboratories in the world, in low and middle income countries, to have the possibility to download the app and to use it. And this will be hopefully by 2023.
And the idea is that this app is free to use in these low and middle income countries.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also the first time that an open source app and free app is developed from low and middle income countries with low and middle income patients, user, and for low and middle income country patients. So, yeah.
Is there any application in high income countries? Like, is there any use for that in, elsewhere?
I'm not sure there is a need, in fact, in high-income countries regarding the availability of the human resources, and also because usually in high-income countries, you have this bulky, expensive automatic machine that can perform the interpretation of those tests in big university hospitals. Those machines are never going to be available for low and middle income countries, and they were not developed for the setting. So I think the objective also of such tools are different depending of the setting. In high income countries is to decrease the workload and to decrease, for example, the number of laboratory technicians who work, whereas in low and middle income countries, our objective is really to support the capacity building of the human resources and to ensure that the patients are treated with the most appropriate treatment.
You said, and very importantly, said that the original goal isn't to develop an app, but it's really to fight antibiotic resistance. Now, we know that it's quite accurate now. Does that automatically mean that we're going to have improvements in that domain by having better results at that stage of diagnosis?
The great things with microbiology and those diagnostic tests and with the app and the ability to have an accurate results that will be used for the patient is that we will act directly on the patient management. First, the patient will have the most adapted drugs within the most appropriate time, and so.
How long is the time between you're taking the photo? How quick does this app work?
The good things is that the longest part is before the app. Is usually identifying the bacteria and doing the test. But then once you have the test, the reading and making the interpretation of the test take between 3 and 5 minutes. And after that, you can make your results available for clinician. So we will act directly on the mortality and the improvement of the outcome for the patients, but indirectly, we will also improve surveillance capacity. Today, one of the problems in low and middle income countries is that we don't know. We don't know if there is resistance, we don't know what is the burden of resistance, and we don't know which antibiotic could we continue to use and the one that we cannot continue to use. By collecting a good quality data, and the app will allow us to collect this data, we will also help other patients. For example, if patients arrive very critical in the hospital, you don't have the time to do the test. So you need to have enough data to inform about the local etiology and the local resistance rate. And so by improving the quality of the data, the app will also benefit to those patients who comes very critical and who cannot have access to a diagnostic test because we need to treat them within the few hours after their arrival.
Can we imagine this kind of technology being used in other applications? In other, for other diagnoses?
I think, obviously, it depends, in fact, the objective. For us, the objective was mainly to fill the gap of the human resources and train human resources without replacing them, of course. And I think in low and middle income countries, there are a lot of areas in medicine and in care that are suffering from this lack of human resources. I give, for example, infectious disease specialists. One of the problems also that you have is that you don't have clinical microbiologists, but from the other side, you don't have clinicians that are specialized in infectious disease. And so some clinicians, they don't know how to use the results of the test. And so such tools can be used in the future for also those kind of support where we see that there is a lack of human resources.
And just finally, you personally, how are you feeling about the app? I mean, how proud are you about this project? It's been, you said 2016, you originally had the idea. You know, what the ups and downs, and you know, where are you at the moment, like we've done it, or are we not there yet?
I think, like, especially because we are in a very important, it's a momentum for us, this May, this end of May, regarding this certification and the fact that the app is going to be acknowledged as a medical device. I'm very happy with the results, and I'm just looking forward to see the laboratory technician in the different countries and projects using the app. And I'm looking forward to see our first patient treated because the app was able to make an accurate interpretation of his test.
And when can we imagine that happening? Early 2023, or we can't?
No, it's going to come this summer. It's going to be very quick. So I hope from July we'll start the implementation. I think July we'll start with Jordan, and then August and September we'll move to other Western African countries.
Dr. Nada Malou, I'd like to thank you for not sharing the project, but also your passion and drive to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's wonderful to have such a concrete and applied project to round out our discussion on big innovations that will change health. Thank you to all of the speakers who participated, and we look forward to seeing you at various other discussions at the ChangeNOW conference over the next day now. That's all. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.